In today's video, we're going to find the perfect Plexi for my studio, and I've got a feeling you're going to be surprised by the results. Hi, my name's Nick Jennison and I'm thinking about guitar. And in today's video, I am going to be putting an end to a quest that I've been on for some time, which is the quest to find the perfect Plexi for my studio. And in the intro, you heard me playing through the winner of this comparison that we're about to embark on. And I want to know from you guys what amp you think that was. Post your guesses in the comments. The winner will be revealed at the end of this video. But let's talk about what's going on here. So I'm surrounded by beautiful amplifiers. I've got so many amps, right? I've got great sounding high gain amps. I've got beautiful sounding clean amps. I've got a gorgeous sounding AC in the form of my Victory Copper. I've got some fantastic 800 style amplifiers. I've got a 900 style amplifier. I've got my Victory Super Sheriff, which does that modded 800 sound really, really beautifully. It dawned on me the other day that what I'm missing is a really great Plexi. And so far for Plexi Tones, I've been using this Marshall SV20 combo, which is a great sounding little amplifier for some things, but it doesn't do all of the Plexi tones that I really look for in a great Plexi. I don't think anyway. So what I'm going to do is I've gathered up a bunch of amps, 5 in particular, and I'm going to put them through a tone test. And the way we're going to do this is I'm going to dial each amplifier to get the best version of the tone that I'm looking for, that I can get out of that amp. We're not going to try and match settings or anything like that. We're just going to try and dial each amp to sound its best under the following circumstances. We are going to do a Strat clean tone, for which I'm going to use my PRS Silver Sky. We're then going to do a chimey mid-gain crunch with some mini humbuckers from my Baum Backwing. By the way, if you want to see a full review of that guitar, you can go and check it out. There'll be a card up here somewhere or up this way, I'm not sure. We are then going to take a listen to a cranked humbucker tone where we just get as much gain out of the amp as we possibly can. For that, I'm playing my PRS McCarty 594 with some vintage sounding humbuckers. And finally, we're going to take a listen to a fuzz test, because Plexis and fuzz, they go together like two things that go together really well. And for that, I'm going to play my Maybach Convair. Once again, you can check out a full review that we've done of that guitar. Another card is going to be poking around somewhere up here. Now, the way you're going to be hearing all of these amplifiers is I'm going to connect them via the speaker outputs to my N-Audio 8x7 amp switcher. We're going into my Boss Waza tube amp expander. We'll use the same IR for every amp, but we won't use the same one for every example. So the clean tone will have its own IR, the crunch tone will have its own IR, etc., etc. The amplifiers we're looking at today, we have, first of all, the Marshall SV20, and this is a combo amp, but I've got the speaker disconnected. I'm running the output, the speaker output, directly into the switching setup. This is the Plexi that I've been using for basically everything, and you can think about this as a miniature Marshall Super Lead. We also have its cousin in the form of a Marshall JTM Studio Combo, which is a 20-watt version of a JTM 45, which is not strictly a Plexi. Now, again, you can argue the toss here, but to my mind, Plexi implies JMP rather than JTM. It's a very different sound, but it has some excellent tones within, and I think it's a worthy addition to this comparison. Now, the next amp we're going to be taking a look at, amp number 3, is going to be this PRS HDRX 20, which I've bought with my own money. Now, you guys know that I'm a PRS artist. I didn't reach out to PRS for this one. They don't know we're shooting this video. This is just something that I bought because I wanted to try. I got a really great deal on it from my friends at Peach Guitars. Bargain of the century, to be honest. I won't tell you how much I paid, but it was nowhere near as much as it should have been. Now, for you guys who are unfamiliar, this amplifier is a loving recreation by Paul Reed Smith and Doug Sewell of one of Jimi Hendrix's Woodstock amps. And this would have been a late 60s, 68 or 69 JMP 100-watt amplifier. They were allowed by the Hendrix estate to take it apart, to measure the amp, to take all the readings they need to recreate it. And that is what we're looking at here, with the exception that this one has a 20-watt power output. Now, the other amps we're looking at, because as you guys I'm sure are aware, I'm a Victory amps artist. I do like Victory amplifiers. We're not using the Super Sheriff, because the Super Sheriff, to my mind, is more of a hot-rodded 800 style amplifier. However, we are using its predecessor, which is the Sheriff 44. Now, this is a discontinued amplifier, but this is the more vintage style British Marshall style amplifier that Victory used to make before the revamped Sheriff range. And I've got this on loan from a good friend. I really like the way this amp sounds. I think it's quite a misunderstood amp, and I think we'll do a full video on this amplifier another time. And finally, the last amp in the comparison is a Victory Sheriff 25. Now, this is the 25-watt version of the modern Sheriff range, and you might be saying to me, well, just use the Super Sheriff. Surely it's the same thing. I feel like these two amps sound very different, and I feel like the Sheriff 25 is the more vintage of the pair. And we're going to be sticking primarily on its vintage channel, although when it's time for the high gain cranked example, I think we'll pop to the hot rod and just hear how it sounds. Now, the first example we're going to take a look at is that Strat clean sound. Let's take a listen, and then we'll talk more about what you're hearing once you've had a chance to examine how these amps sound. Now, to my mind, the clear standouts here were the Studio JTM, and that is no surprise, considering that a JTM 45 is basically a Fender Bassman, so one of the best sounding clean amps of all time, and PRS, both of which had a lovely, thick, full low end that still stayed nice and tight and percussive where you needed it to be, and a beautiful chime on the high end without sounding harsh. The other amps, I feel like they kind of struggled. The Victory Sheriff 25 and the Studio Vintage in particular, I struggled to get low enough gain out of them without them basically just being off. So you can kind of hear the amps struggling there, I think, and there's not quite enough low end to make a clean sound really sound convincing and thick and full. I think they both sounded a bit strident, maybe a little bit harsh. I think third place goes to the Sheriff 44, but even still, a bit more of that nasal mid-range. That is great for a crunch tone, but it's not necessarily what we want for a clean. Speaking of crunch tones, let's grab some mini humbuckers in my Baum back wing. We're going to dial up some chimey sounding crunch tones. Let's take a listen and then we'll talk some more. Now, once again, for me, the clear standout is the PRS, but honorable mentions go to the Sheriff 25. And once you get the gain up just far enough to wake the amplifier up, it chimes really, really nicely. However, I don't think it has the clarity in the trebles or the extension in the low end that we get from the PRS. And I think a lot of this is down to the combination of master volume and the two internally jumped channels. Now, an interesting thing happens with Plexis that have break caps, in that as you turn the treble channel volume up, the high treble channel, the break cap has less and less of an effect. Now, what you can do with this, with the PRS at least, is you can set the treble volume so you get the right amount of brightness out of the bright cap, and then use the master volume to determine how hard you're hitting the power amp, which is a really useful way of getting just the right amount of chime going on. So I think that feature in particular is kind of allowing the PRS to cheat this test, but I've got to say I'm pretty pleased with the results we got dialed in. Now, the Studio JTM did an admirable job, but as it did with the clean example, but one thing I'll say about this amp is that it's not that loud. It's pretty quiet. Certainly on the clean sound, it struggles to keep pace with my other 100-watt amps in this particular studio setting. It's not a problem when I'm recording stuff, but when I'm doing demos, it's a bit of a pain in the neck and makes judging tones quite difficult. However, listening back in post, I'm quite impressed with the chime, but I still think the PRS takes it. Now, the next test we're going to do is the cranked test. For this, we're going to grab some humbuckers in the form of my PRS McCarty 594. We're going to crank as much useful gain as we can get out of these amps without adding a boost pedal in front, which is going to mean turning them up pretty hot and driving the power tubes. Let's take a listen to how that sounds. Now for me, this is really where the Studio Vintage, the little 20-watt Plexi combo, comes into its own. I think it has a fantastic cranked tone, especially when you dime the presence. However, I feel like the PRS keeps pace really, really nicely. Now, the Sheriff 25 does sound pretty cool, but for this, we flipped over to the Hot Rod channel, which really has more of a modded 70s kind of tone, which is not really what I'm looking for here. So it's a cool tone, but it's not really the tone, so to speak. And as far as the Studio JTM goes, it just kind of blows out a little bit. And this has been my experience with JTM 45s. When you get them cranked up too much, they just get a little bit too flubby and a little bit too diffuse sounding, if that makes sense. I don't really think this is where this amp shines. I think in the clean and the chimey tones, that's really where it lives. There's some really interesting sounds coming out of the Sheriff 44, however. It's very brown and very compressed sounding. For this, I was into channel 2, which is the higher gain channel, and it almost has this variac or voltage starved kind of feel going on. And that's a really cool sound, but for me, it's not the Plexi sound that I'm looking for. I'm looking for that punchy, bright, chimey kind of tone with loads of teeth, but also with a big percussive low end. Now, the last test we're going to take a look at is a fuzz tone. For this, we're going to grab the Maybach Convair. I'm going to throw on a Boss FZ1W Wazacraft fuzz. Let's take a listen to how these amps handle a fuzz pedal. Now, this really is a case of pick your poison, I think, because all these amps sound very different with the fuzz, but I think they also sound pretty great. Now, I think my favorite is the Sheriff 44 here because it has this really cool, again, saggy, voltage-starved kind of thing that I think plays really nicely with the fuzz. I think the Studio Vintage does a good job, but there's maybe not quite enough low end there to carry the tone. I think it's kind of compressing a little hard. The PRS has a nice openness, but I feel like I could do with a little more compression. Perhaps that's a dialing issue, but I think really truthfully, the Sheriff 44 is the one for this. Now, that's a really interesting amplifier, and I think again, this warrants its own video because I think it's quite misunderstood. I think people were maybe buying this amp looking for Plexi tones, and what they were getting was maybe not quite what they expected. And I think this has been remedied in the form of the new Sheriff range, but I've got to say, for today, for the perfect Plexi, I'm giving it to the PRS. And that, it should come as no surprise to you, was the amp that we were playing in the intro. I think for everything I'm looking for a Plexi, those great clean tones, those beautiful chimey mid-gain tones, the cranked up high gain classic rock sounds. It kind of does it all, man. And you would sort of expect as much, given that it's got Jimi Hendrix's name on the back, which is some hefty responsibility for a little 20-watt amplifier to bear. But I really do think it's won the day today. But what I want to know from you guys is, which one was your favorite? Did you have one that stood out to you for any one of these given tones that we're looking at? Did you have one that you feel like did the best across the board? I know I did. Again, it was the PRS for me, but I want to know from you which one was your favorite. Don't forget to hit all of the appropriate YouTube icons. You know what to do. My name's Nick Jennison, thinking about guitar. I'll see you again very soon.